Welcome to the Talk Like a Leader podcast, where we explore the mindset, skill set, and habit set of leadership communication. Using these tips, techniques, and tactics, you'll be able to talk like a leader to build better relationships and get more done. Your host is Guy Harris, who has more than 20 years of combined professional and military experience in consulting, coaching, and training in areas like team and interaction dynamics, communication strategies and tactics, as well as emotional intelligence. Take it away, Guy.
Hi, this is Guy Harris. Welcome to Talk Like a Leader. This week's episode is titled Identifying Your Blind Spots so you can guard against them. And before I go too far in the process of talking about how you can identify your blind spots, I want to talk a little bit about what blind spots are. And the context I'm talking about here would be areas of interaction with other people, the decisions you make about how to engage, when to engage, that type of thing, can be affected by how you see things and how you interpret both how you're going to be perceived and how you perceive others. The challenge is that none of us has a perfectly clear vision of ourselves. None of us can be completely objective about our response to things. Quote I got that I think came from the book Crucial Conversations is that you're on the wrong side of your eyeballs to be objective about you. Meaning that you will never see yourself 100% clearly. And frankly, neither will I. That's just the human condition. So what's this got to do with blind spots? Well, since we won't ever see ourselves perfectly objectively, it means that there are parts of our interaction with others and our interpretation of other people's actions that will be very clear, and that tends to come from our strengths in terms of engagement, perception, that kind of thing with ourselves and others. There are also areas where we don't see so clearly, and we'll call those blind spots. A blind spot is similar in interaction to like a blind spot on a vehicle. So I have a pickup truck, and I have mirrors on the sides, and as I'm driving down the road and I try to change lanes in a multi-lane road, there are places on either side of the vehicle where I really can't see all that clearly. I can't really see it in my rearview mirror. I can, if I turn my head, sort of see it, but I'm trying to pay attention to going forward, so I really only take a glance. I don't really look in that area, which means on both the right and left side of my vehicle, there's a spot where I just don't see all that clearly. That's my blind spot. Well, what do I do about that? Well, the manufacturer has actually installed some mirrors, actually two kinds of mirrors. One that is a fairly large, looks right straight down the side of the vehicle kind of mirror, and another's more rounded so that it extends the field of view a bit. And between those two mirrors, I can actually see into my blind spot. And when I'm looking in the mirrors, I get a feel for what's in that area so I can decide whether it's safe to change lanes or not. Now, one thing I've noticed is when I use the mirrors, even though I get an impression of what's there, I still don't see it nearly as clearly as I see when I'm looking straight ahead. So even though I can adapt and adjust to my blind spot, it's still not perfect vision there. Well, that's similar to the way we interact with others. There are certain things we see super clearly and other things not so clearly. Now, these blind spots tend to be connected to our DISC style, and I've got a number of episodes in this podcast about the DISC model and how to apply it. Today, we're going to talk about this idea of identifying your blind spots, kind of like the manufacturer did with my truck. Identify the blind spots and do something to guard against it, like the manufacturer did in putting mirrors in. See, if you know where your blind spots are, you can beware of stumbling into them, changing lanes and hurting someone unintentionally. And so what I'm going to say is that where your blind spots show up tend to be revealed in two really common ways. One, it would be a strength you have carried to an extreme. So it's like over-applying the strength can become a blind spot. I'll talk more about that in just a minute. Another area that might be a blind spot or reveal your blind spot might be in things that you hear other people talk about or have concern about that you really just don't care that much about or think about too much. So let's go through this. I'll do both examples, and hopefully you'll get an idea here what your blind spot might be And then you can give some thought to how can I protect myself from stumbling into that blind spot? So here are some examples of your strength carried to an extreme. And a little qualifier. And remember, if you listen to any of my other episodes on the DISC model, we talk about style blends, not perfect descriptions of behavior because of a single style. And I can't go into all the subtlety today with just a few minutes. So I'm just going to have to hit each style as if it were a pure style. Recognize that you probably have a blend of the 4 styles. So let's go for it. A strength carried to an extreme. If think about a person who has a lot of dominant traits, they have a strong drive for action and problem solving. And that drive carried to an extreme could turn into running over people. So much focus on action that we run over people. That's a potential blind spot. For a person with a lot of inspiring traits, the outgoing people-oriented trait, a desire to keep things lighthearted and fun, which is actually very positive and encouraging, if it's carried too far, can become unfocused and all talk, no action. Person with a lot of supportive traits, the reserved, people-oriented trait, often has a desire to keep the peace and make things calm and comfortable for people and be sensitive to other people's feelings. That's a great drive. Carried to an extreme, it can become total conflict avoidance and actually saying yes when you mean or would like to say no. And then we look at the person who has a lot of cautious traits, the reserved task-oriented trait, a desire for quality and accuracy, which I think is a great thing, can become so focused on being right that it turns into argumentative and just not caring about the other person's feelings. See, those are examples of strengths carried to an extreme. The starting drive is okay. It's just if you carry it too far, you drift into a blind spot. Now, other ways to look at blind spots or other places or perspectives that might help you identify your blind spot. Maybe what I just said about carrying a strength to an extreme isn't really appropriate to you. Maybe it's more in the area of things you just don't care about or think that much about. So if we look at the person who has a lot of dominant traits, the outgoing task-oriented trait, tend to like to do things on their own and not necessarily be looking for help and encouragement so much as give me a direction and let me run with it. And because you don't think about help and encouragement too much, you might not give it to other people. And that could reveal a blind spot. Person with a lot of inspiring traits often feels comfortable making a decision with limited information, doesn't feel compelled to be bound by structure. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It can lead to freedom and creativity of thought. The challenge is that if you don't think about or care about details and structure, you might completely miss how they can sometimes be important to keep you out of trouble and to make sure we don't make a bad decision. So you go so far in avoiding worrying about details and structure that you don't consider it at all. The reserved, people-oriented trait, supportive trait, something you may not think about a lot is or be concerned about is really confronting people for inappropriate behaviors, may be willing to kind of go along to get along kind of perspective, not necessarily a bad thing, trying to keep the peace. It can turn into, though, the desire to not offend people is so strong that you let people walk on you or you don't confront people that have inappropriate actions or behaviors, particularly from a leadership perspective. You don't protect the team because you're afraid of offending one person. Can reveal a blind spot. And then a person with the reserved task-oriented trait, it's often true that people with that trait, the cautious trait, don't have a strong need to be liked. They probably prefer to be liked, don't have a need for it, aren't really motivated by it, don't really think about it too much. And that can unfortunately turn into not showing other people that you like them or engaging in a way that's cold and unemotional and doesn't give much emotional feedback to people so that they can know whether you do think highly of them or not. Now, these are not foregone conclusions. And by pointing out a blind spot, I don't mean to imply a weakness. It's awareness of your blind spot can be a great strength, actually. And like my truck, the blind spot probably never goes away completely. By being aware of it, though, you can take actions to guard yourself against it. You can stay free to use your strength to greatest benefit without pushing it so far that it becomes a weapon or slips into a blind spot. You can be mindful of things that aren't really top of mind to you and might be to other people. And by being aware of that, you can make sure that you're sensitive to it and take the appropriate actions to stay out of that blind spot. So if you can identify your blind spots, take some positive action to avoid them in your interactions with other people, you can talk like a leader. This has been the Talk Like a Leader podcast. You can listen to this show every week wherever you get your podcast. If you haven't, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'm Guy Harris, and thanks for listening.